But that cold front will be kicking away the heat for a time. So temperatures Wednesday and Thursday still pretty warm and fine in the sunshine. This weather front will bring some rain across the north, but the high builds back and the temperatures could rise again this weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to another week of On the Money. I'm Alistair Stewart, delighted to be standing in for my good friend Liam Halligan. And for the next hour, we'll be talking about how tax cuts might help us through the cost of living crisis, exploring whether they are the fairy tale stuff dismissed by the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak or the bold way forward. Plus, Elon Musk's bid for Twitter. Has he blocked it, muted it, or put it in pending? And your flight rights business or family holiday. What happens if the airline grounds you? Great subjects with people who really know their stuff. You're on the money. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the GB News headlines. Here's Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, Boris Johnson says he's determined to deliver the mandate he was elected on in 2019 in his final few weeks as Prime Minister. It's his first public appearance since he resigned as Conservative leader last week. There are now 11 candidates in the running to replace him. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has become the latest senior cabinet minister to add her name to the list. Well, speaking in the last hour, the Prime Minister said throwing his weight behind one of the candidates could damage their chances.
My job is really just to oversee the process for the next few weeks, and I'm sure that the outcome will be good. And we just need to get on. And as I said, I think before to you, the more we focus on the people, on the people who elect us, on their jobs, their hopes, what they can get out of investment in science and technology. The more we talk about the future that we're trying to build, the less we talk about politics at Westminster, the generally happier we will all be.
Conservative MP Robert Jenrick told us he's backing the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak.
Personally, I think it's best to focus on what that individual can really offer the country. And as I say, I think Rishi is the person of the greatest ability. He's an incredible hard worker. He's someone who has achieved enormous things already for the country. Front and centre will be the economy, and so choose the most economically literate person and the person that the public trust the most to deliver for them.
Well, when will there be a new leader? A timetable for the contest is expected to be drawn up this week once the new 1922 executive has been voted in. The group of backbenchers will then finalise the rules of the leadership contest. They're meeting today to discuss changes that could limit the number of candidates who can run. They're also looking at the rules governing a no-confidence vote. That's something the Labour Party's pushing for in order to attempt to immediately remove Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has announced that Labour will focus the next election on growing the economy. In a speech this morning, he said Britain's dealing with a crumbling economy and deserves better. The Labour leader hit out at what he called the hypocrisy of those who served in the Prime Minister's government, saying they supported tax hikes despite being opposed to them all along.
Britain deserves better than this. We need a fresh start. We're not going to get that from a Conservative Party infected with the chaos virus caught from Boris Johnson. This is what I will do for Britain. And I will do it with a plan to tackle the three biggest issues that we face: rebooting our economy and ending the cost of living crisis.
Some international news now. The president of Sri Lanka is going to resign after protesters stormed the capital over the weekend demanding political reform. Tens of thousands of protesters bombarded the official homes of, well, both the president and prime minister in Colombo on Saturday in the wake of the economic crisis hitting the country. The prime minister's office says the president would step down on Wednesday, with the prime minister adding he'd also resign to allow an all-party government to take over. Heathrow Airport has ordered airlines to cancel more than 60 flights scheduled for today because it couldn't handle the expected number of passengers. A spokesperson for the airport says it's expecting two of the terminals to be busier than usual. They've warned holidaymakers they could cancel more flights this summer. Tens of thousands of people have already been affected by flight delays and cancellations over the past few months. Scientists have designed a new contraceptive to help limit the number of grey squirrels in the UK. The government says it's going to be field tested soon. The plan involves trapping the squirrels into feeding boxes and spiking their food with birth control pills. The project's goal is to help protect ecosystems and native red squirrel populations. Today could be the hottest of the year so far in Britain. The Met Office has issued a heat health alert for parts of the UK as temperatures are predicted to hit 33 degrees this week. The alerts will stay in place until Friday. People are being asked to check on those vulnerable to extreme heat. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to On the Money and Alistair.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. Welcome to On the Money. The race for the Tory leadership is on, and with it the keys to number 10, and the candidates remain fixated with the twin issues of tax cuts and spending. Everyone, bar the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, wants tax cuts, but they're all in the witness box now over how they'd pay for them. Now, the widely respected Institute of Fiscal Studies entered the fray, saying it was simple arithmetic that doesn't add up. Perhaps that is why Rishi dismisses them as fairy tales. Well, we'll be talking to the IFS, but we also want to know what you think about those concerns. Traditional Tory beliefs in a lower tax, lower spending, smaller state are in play. Make no mistake. And here's another really significant contribution from Daily Mail columnist Dominic Lawson, who says why my father, Nigel, the great Tory tax cutter, would be backing Rishi's cautious approach today. That is an article that is really well worth reading, because he also throws in at the end that Margaret Thatcher would agree with him. It's dynamite for the contest and indeed for the future of the Tory party. But will the right forgive Rishi his U-turn on tax cuts because he's proving to be a very woke, anti-woke candidate? Also today, has Elon Musk muted or deleted his $44 billion bid for Twitter? The boisterous billionaire seems to have gone very quiet, but has made it clear that in his view, some of the facts and figures from Twitter simply don't add up. Could it just be that the world's leading light on electric cars and the guy who wants to send people to the moon and Mars just found social media all a bit tricky? Plus, we'll be talking flights and your legal rights. Be it a business trip or a family holiday, where do you stand if the airline or the travel company simply grounds you? And finally, Lord Frost and Steve Baker are relaunching Conservative Way Forward, with Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi in attendance. We'll be keeping a very close eye on all of that, as fireworks are expected, and if they're really exciting, we'll cross over live to it, but we will be keeping an eye on it for you. Be on the money, and you won't want to go anywhere. Well, forming my expert panel today is an old friend of mine, Gerard Lyons, Chief Economist, Strategist at Net Wealth, Carl Emerson, who's the Deputy Director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies that I mentioned at the very top there. There he is on the right of your picture, and Gerard's there bang in the middle. And also live here in the studio with me is Helen Thomas, the CEO of Blonde Money. I'm glad that you call it Blonde Money and not anybody else. We've been in terrible trouble from the outset. And you also worked under George Osborne, so you've got the inside track on all of this. I want to start off with Carl, if I may. The IFS says that the tax cuts offered by everybody, bar Rishi Sunak, simply don't add up. Take us briefly through that.
I think it's important to remember why the outgoing Chancellor has been announcing and implementing very big tax rises. And I think it's for two reasons. Firstly, on the public spending side, there's a desire to spend more on things like health and social care, while at the same time not cutting spending elsewhere, so having an end to the age of austerity. So no cuts to public spending. And alongside that, there's a desire to get government borrowing back down to more normal levels. And if you want borrowing to get back to normal levels and you don't want to cut spending, then you're going to need more tax revenue. And that's why I think Rishi Sunak has been announcing and implementing really quite chunky tax rises.
But we just heard in Rosie's news bulletin, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, saying he's going to boost the economy, and he thinks that the members of the cabinet who are now calling for tax cuts are simply hypocrites. When you've got a cost of living crisis like we all face right now, sometimes you've got to do the counterintuitive, maybe even economically illogical thing to get that economy going again and help folk listening to this conversation.
I think there's two slightly different issues here. One is about the short term, about helping households through a very difficult time. And I think there you've got to be pretty careful, because injecting lots of cash into an economy which has got supply side constraints is at risk of generating yet more inflation. Over the longer term, if you want to cut taxes, you can do it. What you need to do is identify what's the state doing that we think is a bit marginal, where can we cut back on public spending. Once we've done the public spending cuts, then yes, at that point you can go for a smaller state and start to cut taxes. And you can. One way of achieving that is perhaps going for a long-run growth strategy, but it's not going to get you more money in the near term.
Gerard, let's bring you in, if I may. That's Carl, very objectively stating his side, and his boss Paul Johnson said it over the weekend as well. Do you agree?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we need a pro-growth economic strategy, and discussion about tax cuts need to be seen within the context of that overall growth strategy. And I think that's very important in terms of the overall debate. In terms of where we are now, I think it's important to stress that temporary, timely, and targeted tax cuts are possible. They need to be very much targeted, and they will not necessarily cause inflation if they're targeted, because the economy currently faces a twin problem. Faces higher inflation and an economic slowdown with collapsing consumer and business confidence and weaker demand. At the same time, there is still fiscal space for targeted tax cuts. So certainly, if you're willy-nilly cutting taxes across the board, that causes problems. But very briefly, we've got three areas of which the current or the previous Prime Minister and previous
We appear to have lost Gerard there. I'm going to ask the gang behind me to do everything they possibly... He's there now. Sorry, you were saying you agree with the basic argument at the beginning of it, but it's about timing.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure what you got, but basically there is scope for tax cuts provided they are targeted at the right areas. For instance, help to those people most in need to help them through the crisis is essential. But then over and above that, tax cuts that are aimed at mitigating the impact of higher fuel prices, for instance, cutting VAT on fuel, cutting petrol prices at the pump, and indeed even thinking about suspending temporarily the environmental levy. All of those are plausible without being inflationary. And at the same time, there is fiscal space. But of course, the important thing is you can't just cut taxes across the board and do that and hope that's the answer. It has to be seen within the growth context, and it's very much a case of where you are targeting those tax changes. For instance, income tax cuts, increasing allowances should be the aim, but they need to be seen within the overall context. Corporation tax next spring, I don't think the corporation tax increase should go ahead, because keeping it stable, unchanged, helps the supply side of the economy. So there are some tax cuts that are possible. There is fiscal space, and they will not cause inflation, but you just can't cut taxes on everything all at once at the same time.
Thank you very much indeed. As I said, Helen's sitting in here listening. A fantastic start from them, and Carl, as I asked him to be, entirely objective. But you've got your finger on the public pulse through Blonde Money, and you deal with people face to face. These are great economists, brilliant statisticians, people trying to pay their energy bills, trying to stretch their pounds and get through the supermarket experience, are going to say, I don't care about the public sector borrowing requirement, frankly. I don't care about borrowing and government debt. I need some help right now.
Yes, that is true. But all these specific targeted measures, as we just heard there from Gerard, have to be part of a bigger picture, because you can't rip up and throw out that economics textbook. And what we're living right now, we're literally living through the experiment, an economic experiment. With, not only a pandemic, which was bad enough, but obviously the war. I think this is the key point here. And added into the war is, how long do we think this is going on for? Frankly, I think.
But do you agree with those two, that in terms of the experiment, because Margaret Thatcher in the mid-70s and 79 was an experiment. Everybody said, you can't possibly do that, that can't possibly happen. And also Tony Blair for Labour, when he dropped Clause 4 and said we no longer aspire to controlling the commanding heights of the economy, that was an experiment. Both of them won 3 elections and ruled for a decade.
Well, this is it about ripping up the rule book. You set the rules.
Yeah.
As Prime Minister and Chancellor, you set the rules. And under the previous Chancellor, under Rishi Sunak, there was a sense that the Treasury, he felt bound by the Treasury trying to keep him prudent. Now, prudence is a direction in and of itself, but you're going to get a different economic outcome. Yeah. So I think what's fascinating, what's important about this debate we're having now is setting the weather, setting the tone. What is the long-term direction here? And actually hugely fundamentally important for the direction of the economy, for the pound in the pocket.
Do you think your former boss, George Osborne, would say, OK, here's what we'll do, is we'll reduce the taxation, despite what Carl and what Gerard have just said. And if needs be, come the day, we'll have a little bit more austerity to then bring public spending back under control?
I think the concept is sound money, and Thatcher is often talked about as a sound money individual. And we all know, if we do go back in time, that if you let inflation spiral viciously out of control, you really do have a problem.
Gerard, I will come back to you as well, Carl, but particularly on that point that Helen just made about one of those magic words that you and I both grew up and recited far too many times that was good for all of us, prudence. The fact of the matter is, for Joe and Joanna Public, who will be governed by this man or woman, whoever leads the Conservative Party, because they get the job of Prime Minister as well, they are going to say, forget prudence for now. You want to try prudence when I'm paying my energy bill and paying the bill at the cash out in the supermarket?
What Minister should do is provide further help to those people most in need, to help them through the October energy price increase. I think the new Prime Minister should cut immediately, as much as possible, all taxes on fuel, including the environmental levy being suspended. Halving VAT on fuel at the petrol pumps is easily affordable. Corporation tax increase should be suspended. Then the timing of income tax cuts and allowance is being increased to get people out of fiscal drag. That needs to depend on overall economic conditions. But the key thing is this: there is scope, basically, there is still some fiscal space, but it has to be seen within the overall growth context. I think just the final part, I would say the economic consensus is very much of the view that Britain is a low growth economy, therefore more of the budget deficit is structural. That has to be therefore paid for by tax increases or spending cuts. We need to turn that on the head and say, how do we get economic growth up? That's the way out of this challenge. Otherwise, we are in a hole and digging deeper. Because if you believe growth is low, more of the budget deficit is structural, more tax increases are necessary, then you actually restrain individuals and companies and you hold back the economy. So there needs to be a sea change in economic thinking, but we have to be realistic about what is achievable in the short and medium term. But we certainly should be ambitious, and low taxes have to form part of it, but it needs to be part of the overall growth strategy, not being judged as low taxes by themselves.
Final cheeky question to my good friend Carl sitting there at the IFS. We're joking about prudence, but all of us know very well that the IFS's green book, the budget that you put out before the real thing happens, is something we all look at, trawl through and see what the options are, because it is genuinely objective and a terrific background document. If Liz Truss were to win, or possibly any of the others, that budget that's penciled in for November may come forward. What would be the headline of the IFS's green budget if there were to be a budget in August, September?
Well, certainly we would have to write the document first. I think what we'd be stressing there is setting the context. How big are the tax rises that have already been announced? Who are they hitting? As Gerard said, who's getting the support that's coming in October? Are there gaps in that support? And then what might a long-run growth strategy be? And how might you go about it? If you want to cut taxes to create long-run growth, what perhaps are the best levers to pull? I would suggest that, for example, the corporation tax rise might be higher up the list than some of the other tax cuts that are being suggested.
All right, Carl, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for breaking in today to join us here on GB News. And Gerard as well, most grateful for your time too. Helen, you're staying put because you've been good enough to stay with us for the whole hour. And we'll reflect on some of those points. Gerard talking about a sea change. Well, there's food for thought. Carl Emerson there, Deputy Director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And this is On the Money with me, Alastair Stewart. Coming up after this break, the Tesla boss Elon Musk walked away from his $44 billion Twitter deal. We'll be discussing the legal fallout of that with a top tech expert, Charles Arthur. So do stay with us. You're on the money, and keep those emails coming in as well.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You are watching On the Money with me, Alastair Stewart, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. Now, before we dive into our next topic, Twitter, let's take a quick look at one or two of the views that have come in on whether tax cuts are the fairy tale stuff dismissed by Rishi Sunak, or indeed whether it should be a question of the bold way forward. Alfie says tax cuts aren't fairy tales. The economies that do best have low taxation, which stimulates growth. I'm not sure that Rishi Sunak can do the maths. He's been Chancellor for 2.5 years and we have the highest taxes in years. Brian says, a cut in income tax means more money in the pockets of workers. Let people decide for themselves how their money is spent. That might mean more takeaways or investment schemes, but let them decide. Do keep those emails coming in. I particularly like those two. And that last one, because that's what we were talking about earlier on. It's about political philosophy as much as economics.
That's absolutely it. And I'm so glad we're finally having this discussion. That's what we need to be doing, especially 12 years into an administration. This is what the Conservative Party needs to nail, and the public get it. They really do. And I did smile when I read that one about Rishi can't do the sums. Well, he has been Chancellor for 2.5 years. The other thing you can't do with the British public is pull the wool over their eyes.
Absolutely, absolutely, Brendan. Stay exactly where you are, Helen. Thank you very much indeed. Tons more to come. And to you, thank you very much indeed. I won't be reading out Jamie's email, but I'd just like to say thank you, Jamie. I was very touched. Now, back in April, the Tesla boss and the world's richest man, Elon Musk, revealed that he'll be taking over Twitter in a bid to reinstate it, as he put it himself, as a platform for freedom of speech. But it didn't come cheap, with Musk putting forward $44 billion to buy up the social media giant after weeks of speculation about the future of the platform. But just this weekend, Elon Musk walked away from his acquisition of Twitter after they refused to hand over information of fake accounts on the site. Well, the billionaire may now have a huge legal case on his hands, as the social media giant Twitter has hired a heavy-hitting Delaware-based law firm to sue Mr. Musk. But was that his plan all along? Why go through all of this effort just to back out at the first legal hurdle? Well, joining me now to shed some light on that is Charles Arthur. Charles is formerly The Guardian's technology editor and author of Social Warming, the Dangerous and Polarising Effects of Social Media. And Helen is listening to this conversation and she'll chip in as well. Helen is the CEO of Blonde Money. Great to see you and thank you very much indeed for joining. Do you buy that explanation that he always can't get the data that he wants on fake accounts, what have you, or is he game playing?
No, I don't buy it at all. I mean, if you want an explanation for what's going on in a way that I think most people would understand, if you're buying a house in England, then you find a house and you go around it and you get a survey done. Your solicitors talk to their solicitors. You draw up a contract and you agree a price. You exchange contracts. At that point, you're locked into buying the thing. Elon has done all of those steps, except rather than buying a house, he was going to buy a social media company. So he agreed the price, he had a look around it. He said, no, I don't need to get a survey done. I'm perfectly happy. It's a really nice little social network you got here. And then he gets into it and thinks, wait a minute, this is a lot of money, isn't it? This is quite difficult. And it starts throwing up all sorts of really strange questions like, well, how many fake accounts do you have? Even though one of the reasons he gave for why he wanted to buy Twitter in the first place back in April was, well, you've got so many fake accounts on here, I could get rid of all the fake accounts and make it a really nice place to be. It just doesn't actually stack up. So now, rather as if having exchanged contracts to buy a house, you say, no, I'm not going to buy your house. The people who are trying to sell you the house can go after you for the full amount. Twitter, in the same way as they're saying, well, you said you'd buy us for $44 billion. You've got a penalty clause, which is at least $1 billion. So, you're now on the hook for anywhere between $1 and $44 billion. And quite how this plays out in Delaware is going to be interesting. But Delaware as a court venue has a history of siding with the companies rather than the people trying to get away from them. So
I know it well, and very well and actively politically supported by those wonderful lobbyists in Crystal City across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. There's another possibility, and you are the ideal person to answer this question. When he looked at it, he's the leading expert on electric cars in the world. He even seriously contemplates putting people back in space rockets and going up to Mars. All of that's meat and drink to him. Is it just possible that social media, with all of the complexities that you've written about so brilliantly, is just a bit beyond him?
Well, social networks are really hard to do well.
Yeah.
It looks easy from the outside. You say, well, what you do is you just get rid of all the people who are being troublesome. But actually, the people who are being troublesome, such as Elon Musk, tend to be the ones, and Donald Trump, tend to be the ones who actually keep people coming to it again and again. So social networks have this weird problem where it's actually the noisiest people, the very few, the sort of 5%, who actually generate something like 90% of the views. You actually need them. And for all the noise about fake accounts, spam and bot accounts, those tend to be very small proportions. So on Twitter, they estimate it's about 5%, and you'd have to be really skilled in doing the analysis to come up with it. But they've had years to do it, and it's probably somewhere around that figure. If it was 10%, it's not going to make a big difference actually in how the network works. And running a social network is difficult. It's a real-time operation. For Twitter, you're essentially the news network for the world. If it didn't exist, as I often say, you'd have to invent it because it is so useful. But no one's unlocked the value in it. And that's what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And it looks like Twitter itself won't grasp that opportunity to really change how the network works.
Charles, going to come back to you in just a moment, but I want to bring Helen in at this point in the conversation, who've been listening to what you've been saying as well. I mean, that analysis, absolutely crisp and on the money, but it seems to me that the bottom line for the world's richest man is that he can't see how he's going to make money out of this, because if you get a tweet from somebody advertising a product that you don't fancy, you just delete it and block them for the future, or Bitcoin or something like that. How it actually makes money is a bit tricky.
Well, we're finding that with a lot of the internet companies that now exist. Where is the value? What is it? And for example, something like Facebook or Meta, whatever it calls itself now, you are the value. You're what you do and what you look at, who you talk to, and of course you don't even get paid for that because you go on there for free.
But that's really good example, because in the case of Facebook, and I'm on both of them, but on Facebook I very often put messages up and put pictures up because my kids are heavily into show jumping and horses. And I then, within seconds, get adverts from a saddle maker, or I get experts from a tax supplier or haymaker.
Yeah, absolutely. And, well, I mean, this is the world we now live in, is how the world we interact with apparently knows us and is being tailored to us, and some people aren't happy about that. And we might hear that from Charles there. But I would say this about Elon Musk. I mean, clearly very mercurial. To me, this feels a bit like, back in the day, the very wealthy might just buy a newspaper. They just like it. They're just interested in it. They don't know necessarily what to do with it, but they kind of just something about it, they like to be a part of. And I suspect a little bit of this with Elon Musk is perhaps he thought he could kind of get it more to be a company that he liked. Perhaps this is going to, put Twitter into a better position and be more of that freedom of speech that he's looking for. We'll see.
Charles, I'm reminding folk that you wrote the excellent book that you did. Do you think it's one of those moments where, as Helen was just implying, there's Facebook is out there and there's Instagram, all sorts of people, and there are individual human beings making absolute fortunes as opinion formers and influencers, I think they call them. Is this a kind of pause, think and reflect moment for social media that we at least should give credit to Elon Musk for?
Well, I think that social networks are still working as you would sort of expect. Facebook is actually the one which has the biggest problems at the moment, because Apple has introduced various privacy systems, which mean that Facebook has been forecasting that it's going to be making much less money because it can't serve personalized ads on iPhones in the way that it could in previous years. So they've actually got a bigger problem. And the thing about Twitter, to your point, is that actually Twitter knows what we're interested in because we show it to it all the time by who we follow and the things that we choose to like and the things we choose to reply to. If it was actually to apply itself in the way that Facebook did years ago to looking at what your interests are, that you expose to it all the time, and the way that Google gets the same sort of information, you tell it what you're interested in because of what you search for. Twitter could do this, but it's just not had the incentive because it's able to sort of stumble by and just about break even with the brand advertising that it does get, where you sort of see an advert for soap powder or something and maybe you're not interested, but it sort of does okay. For social networks generally, they're still really useful. I mean, if all the others went away, I think the one that you'd actually want to keep, and possibly I'm just being biased because I'm a journalist, but I think the one you would want to keep because it's a news network is Twitter. So the Sri Lankan, revolution over the weekend, all the political events that we saw in this country last week, so much of that plays out through Twitter. You'd want Twitter to exist, as I keep saying, if it didn't exist, and that's where the utility is. Musk did have an idea about getting people to pay subscriptions or getting companies to pay subscriptions. It was very ill-formed, but Helen's idea, again, that it's a bit like someone buying a newspaper, like Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. Possibly this is a sort of one-upmanship on Musk's part over Bezos. I'm even richer than you. Look at me, I buy a whole social network, not just paper.
As Helen was just saying that. Final point to you, Charles, and a very quick one, if you'd be so kind, because we're heading to Rosie's News. Is it just also possible that although he's the world's richest man, the share price of Tesla, his core business, has had a dreadful performance as a direct result of this? Is it just possible, although it's a private company and all the rest of it, he has got other people engaged in it, saying, can we just forget the Twitter game and can we just focus on making electric cars that make us all very rich?
If tech stocks hadn't crashed around April for other reasons, then probably he would have gone ahead with this. This morning, Twitter's stock is down, Tesla's stock is up, so that's actually good news for him. So there's even less reason for him to want to go ahead with this. So, yeah, he can focus on Tesla, he can focus on SpaceX now, and actually get that done.
Stuff. Just as you were saying that, for our good friends who enjoy our conversations on radio rather than on TV, because as you well know, we do both. There was a lovely image of Elon Musk doing that kind of strange sand dance in front of one of his cars, as you made that excellent point. Charles, real pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. Charles Arthur there, author and technology journalist. Helen Thomas is also sitting with me, and that last point I did think was quite extraordinary, that the stock reflects immediately what's happening in the real world. So thank you. Helen will be back in just a moment on the Money's regular economist and also CEO of Blonde Money. That's it for now from me and my guest, but we'll be back right after Rosie's News.
Good afternoon, 1:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today. Boris Johnson says he's determined to deliver the mandate he was elected on in 2019 in his final few weeks as Prime Minister. It's his first public appearance since he resigned as Conservative leader. There are now 11 candidates in the running to replace him. Well, speaking just in the last couple of hours, the Prime Minister said throwing his weight behind one of the candidates could damage their chances.
The job of the Prime Minister at this stage is to let the party decide, let them get on with it, and to continue delivering on the projects that we were elected to deliver.
Sir Keir Starmer has announced Labour will focus the next election on growing the economy. In a speech this morning, he said Britain's dealing with a crumbling economy and deserves better. The Labour leader hit out at what he called the hypocrisy of those who served in the Prime Minister's government, saying they supported tax hikes despite being opposed to them all along.
Britain deserves better than this. We need a fresh start. We're not going to get that from a Conservative Party infected with the chaos virus caught from Boris Johnson. This is what I will do for Britain. And I will do it with a plan to tackle the three biggest issues that we face: rebooting our economy and ending the cost of living crisis. Britain deserves better than this. We need a fresh start. We're not going to get that from a Conservative Party infected with the chaos virus caught from Boris Johnson. This is what I will do for Britain. And I will do it with a plan to tackle the three biggest issues that we face: rebooting our economy and ending the cost of living crisis.
Today could be the hottest of the year so far in Britain. The Met Office has issued a heat health alert for parts of the UK as temperatures are predicted to hit 33 degrees this week. People are being asked to check on those vulnerable to extreme heat. Some breaking news in the last few minutes. The Crown Prosecution Service says the ex-Formula One boss, Bernie Ecclestone, will be charged with fraud by false representation following a HMRC investigation into overseas assets believed to be worth more than £400 million. As we get more, we'll update you here on GB News. TV, online and DAB Plus radio will keep you up to date across the day.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.194 and €1.183. The price of gold currently stands at £1,454.44 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. I have an apology to make. Helen had to go and was only booked for the first hour, so I don't often do this. Liam normally does it, so my apologies if I misled you, but very great thanks to Helen as well. I would have said that on air earlier. It is time now for one of Liam's favourite features, On the Money's daily interview series, Money Talks. And he did this interview before he took a quick break with today's guest, Alan Miller. Alan's a well-known hospitality entrepreneur who set up the Nighttime Industries Association back in 2015, serving as its first chairman. A proud Londoner, Alan has a long track record in business, having founded the Old Truman Brewery in Brick Lane in the heart of the capital's East End in the early 1990s. His drive and creativity helped to attract a range of tenants to the 10-acre site, transforming the locality. Now, prior to that, Alan ran a promotions company in Soho's Denmark Street and club events across the UK, which also branched into live music and fashion. What didn't he do, I asked myself? Well, highly respected for his nighttime industries expertise, Alan's worked with local councils and advised mayors in various cities in the UK and abroad. He's now working full-time with the Together Association, which he co-founded in response to what he's described as the government's draconian lockdown policies. So, here is Alan Miller of the Together Association, the latest guest on Liam's Money Talks.
Alan Miller, thanks a lot for coming in. Great to have you here in the Money Talk studio.
Great to be here with you. Thanks, Liam.
10 years ago, Alan, there were around 50,000 pubs in the UK. In the first half of this year, that fell below 40,000. We're losing huge numbers of pubs, particularly during lockdown. Why should we care?
Well, for many reasons we should care. One, it's because it's part of who we are and our life and social integration. It's about where we go and fall in love. We meet people, we fall out, we discuss things, we row, we celebrate. And in fact, the pub is one of the places that people come from around the world to come and see and experience. It's a place where people tell stories, they meet new friends, and also where lots of new things are born, actually. And, you know, we've got all sorts of pubs and bars that now have music as well. And we know that that brings all sorts of things with DJs and other things, which is a big part of our GDP as it happens. And the multiplier effect of these things in our communities is such that it kind of generates all sorts of secondary and tertiary employment and revenue. But at its core, it's a part of our fabric, our culture and who we are. And if you eliminate those things, it has a really detrimental impact on our whole way of life.
You just demonstrated there, Alan, in a nutshell, that you are an evangelist for the hospitality industry, for the nighttime economy. We're going to come on to that. We're going to talk about all that in depth. But I'm going to ask you something that I've wanted to ask you for a while. Where does this come from? What is it about your childhood, your background, that basically, you know, that makes you so passionate about the importance of that hospitality industry?
Well, you know, I think the thing is that Britain was very different when I was growing up, and I sometimes joke about it with some of the older police with the work that I've done, and they used to talk about Friday fight night and things like that. And there was a kind of different experience when I was growing up, but basically, you know, it's really important where people are brought together. And my experience from a very young age, from music and pubs and places, is that it's a place that you can be tested. It's a place that you can have your ideas examined, and people will tell you to be quiet. You have to, when I was growing up, you had to learn how to conduct yourself and behave yourself. And it was really important. It was like the place where you get your first drink, you become an adult, you know, you start exploring with dating and a range of different things like that. And I've seen the impact that it's had in terms of like where we live, the positive ones. Also, there can be negative ones if it's done in a certain way, right? We all know those old time places that used to be really bad. But what's so remarkable as well was that I grew up at a period where there was also a shift, which was bars and clubs, and the whole experience of acid house, which transformed Britain in many ways.
I was there.
Yeah, along with other things. And it was it was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of challenges. But what it really demonstrated is that, I mean, this is the thing that we have to remind ourselves, like with the Jubilee and like with the Olympics, is that in Britain, and you might not think it anymore with the culture wars and this kind of like really, this nastiness that often seems to pervade social media, but we're all fellow citizens. People want to celebrate together. They want to come together. And without sounding too evangelical, I think it's a really important point. And, you know, there is a thing, and this is not so, I mean, I think that religious congregation and getting together is really important. I support it. It's really important from a freedom point of view. But a lot of people don't do it anymore. So there's a secular kind of sense of getting together. There's also a problem in Britain about us really knowing who we are in many ways. And often just coming together, it tells lies to some of those things they say, right? So some people will say Britain full of really chauvinistic, nasty, terrible people, and then you go out and you explore and you see that everyone's engaging with one another. Not like the old days where I'd be out, where it really would kick off, but actually, you know, people are meeting, there's different languages, people, generations, perhaps not enough intergenerational. Like if you go to Asian night markets, right, you see a range, and even in Barcelona and places like that, there's often sort of a lot more older people. But I'm really passionate about it mainly because I see how it lights up our streets, it transforms areas. In those historical debates around planning between Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs, you can end up like sort of having false dichotomies, full splits, because I think big planning is important sometimes, but also really sort of small, interesting activities important as well. That's kind of grassroots and organic. I think the thing is that, you know, when we came to, I'll give you an example. When we came to Brick Lane, I've seen it in Liverpool and lots
Brick Lane's a place in East London. The place I first met you about 20 years ago. I was pushing one of my kids down the street and you're standing outside the Vibe Bar. You're, all right, mate.
Well, exactly. So the thing is that the World Bank and others have cited that area in Tower Hamlets as an objective 2 area in terms of development, and meaning that it had lots of social problems. And we kind of came along and put together a situation where you had a bar as a focal point, the vibe bar, where you had music and film and fashion, and then lots of activity around it.
And it became an iconic bar. You're being modest. It became an iconic bar. It was at the centre of a kind of revival of East London. I mean, decades ago.
Yeah, and well, thank you. And the World Bank cited it as an example of urban regeneration. Now, that term is loaded with you could have a big discussion about what regeneration means, but it did transform things in the area, and people then cited it as an example of what to be done, and other cities emulated it and wanted to reflect it. And I've seen in many places, whether it's Ibiza, Las Vegas, love it or loathe it, right? If you look at Nashville, if you look at different cities around the world, Amsterdam, Barcelona, there's a range of examples where night and day, hospitality, bars, drink, music, food, activity, it brings the best out of people, it lights up the cities, it brings people there. It's a reason why Sarah Tate, who's the managing director of Mother Agency, which is one of our big ad agencies, right? Huge accounts globally, located on the corner of Hackney and Tower Hamlets, right? In that Mother building. The reason they did that is because the reason many want to be around activity like that, like Soho used to have so much appeal, is because they want to be the best and the brightest, want to be in an area that's interesting and dynamic and exciting.
Not necessarily the most ritzy part of town.
Not at all. And actually what's then happened is it transforms and it becomes different, and you get all sorts of different activity happening there. And so councils and town planners and politicians began to realise this when some of the narrative around policy has all been about antisocial behaviour, bad activity, alcohol-related crimes, alcohol-related harms. It's almost like you take a think tank policy approach to being anti-public and impose it on, when actually what we see is that in every respect, with all indicators, it transforms and improves things. Even when there are some problems, right? Even when there are some problems, the majority cost-benefit analysis is one that it delivers all round from an economic point of view, but from a culture and social point of view. So I'm passionate about it because it's also where I've met my greatest friends. I've seen the relationship between London Fashion Week and the dance floor. If you think about really from the mods onwards, right? But really the whole from the 50s and the 60s, there is no possibility of fashion without the dance floor and music and clubs and that interface and that interaction. If you think about now, anywhere you go around the world, you can be sitting in a bar or a cafe, having a great coffee or a juice or a great alcoholic drink, and you'll hear dance music. And that, that thing that a few people went to Ibiza to do, Danny Rampling and Nicky Holloway and those guys, that interface of those, and that explosion here is now a worldwide phenomenon. It's the cultural tapestry. We see hotels, we see, the Ian Schragers coming out of clubland and becoming dominant and having a contribution. We see tour operators, a range of different protagonists across the board. We have some of the best and the brightest professionals in this country that are leading the way with this. And so it's really, really essential. And that's why when we talk about some of the great businesses that are going out of business for many reasons, we can come on to the reasons why, it's a tragedy in many ways.
Absolutely brilliant. You're on the money with mods and rockers and even going to Ibiza. That was the great Alan Miller of the Together Declaration, and you can listen to the full 25-minute version of that interview now on the Money Talks podcast here on GB News TV and radio and on the YouTube channel or via GB News apps. Now, travel chaos, whether it's off to Ibiza or somewhere else, rumbles on, with Heathrow cancelling over 60 flights just this morning. And there's more cancellations expected over the summer, just as hopeful families and individuals are planning to get away. Staff shortages are being blamed, with airlines confessing to booking too many passengers on flights when they simply don't have the capacity. And now we have more looming bad news. Staff at Heathrow who work for Ryanair, EasyJet and British Airways have voted to strike in the coming months. It can be hard to keep up with what's going on at airports, and if you find yourself in the midst of this bedlam, it's very important to know what you're entitled to do. What do you do if your flight suddenly gets cancelled? Can you get your money back, and more besides? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Paul Britton, legal expert and founder of law firm Britton and Time. First of all, I asked you to comment on that bit in the middle there. It's rough and rotten right now, and all journalists are saying it's going to get rougher and more rotten.
It's been pretty bad over the last year since we've come out of the pandemic and the lockdowns. I think the schedules have been pulled roughly around 40,000 flights already to date, with British Airways announcing another 40 flights pulled this morning. Although it wasn't British Airways, it was Heathrow that's pulled those flights from the schedule. But it is a knock-on effect of British Airways, who then has to inform their customers and deal with the fallout there.
And you're very much wearing a legal hat on these matters, as well as somebody who's interested and well-informed on the subject. In the middle of that lead-in, there was a thing that I read when I came in this morning and thought, wow, blimey. They consciously knew that they didn't have the staff or they didn't have the slots from the airport, and yet they still took bookings. Does that greatly increase the legal rights of the consumer?
It doesn't, Alistair, no.
Oh, should it?
It's unforgivable. Airlines have always overbooked flights, and when it works well, it works well for them. But it's how they deal with it when too many passengers turn up. The situation we've got now isn't so much that too many passengers are turning up, it's the fact that they haven't got enough staff to either check them in, deal with the baggage at the airport, fuel the planes, deal with flight operations, or indeed operate the flight itself.
So it is complicated, and thanks for that clarification. But let's then cut to the chase. Whether you're taking a business trip to Brussels or whether you're going to Ibiza to listen to some popular music, what are your rights if you suddenly get cancelled at the last moment?
At the last minute, you'll be entitled to compensation if you can't take that flight and it is cancelled. The airline does have an obligation to get you where you want to go. So that might mean if you booked with British Airways, you end up on a Virgin Atlantic flight, or what should I say, a Virgin flight, EasyJet, Ryanair, or something like that.
You stressed at the last minute, so is it different if they give you a couple of weeks' notice that your flight's not going to happen?
That you've got a 2-week, if it's less than 2 weeks' notice, so up till that point, you will get, or you'll be entitled to, should I say, compensation for the delay or cancelled flights. If it's more than that, well, then we'll have to look at the terms and conditions and see what rights you have.
And are those common terms and conditions, or do they vary slightly? And let's cut to the chase. They won't mind me calling them, but cheap and cheerful airlines like EasyJet, Ryanair and what have you, they want to keep the costs down as much as possible so that we can all go more frequently. Or you take a deep breath and you book executive, business class, or even first class with someone like BA or whomsoever. Do those rights vary?
It tends to be a standard set of terms and conditions that you get when you're booking your flight. What does vary from airline to airline is how flexible they're going to be with you outside of those terms and conditions. Quite often, if your flight is delayed or cancelled at the last minute, as you said, they will say, well, look, we've got another flight tonight at 9 o'clock, we'll put you on that. The difficulty comes when they haven't got another flight to put you on.
Let's see if we've only got about a minute left, but I confess to you that I would do it, personalising it, as it were. I've got a trip coming up to Europe to see the Rolling Stones, and I took a deep breath and I paid business class because that's what I wanted to do and make sure it all happened. Then I read in the newspapers about 10,000 BA flights being cancelled, and lo and behold, 48 hours later, I got an email saying that flight has been cancelled, but click on this link, you can rebook, and it all happened very comfortably within 5-10 minutes.
So, remember, as the passenger, it's you that's entitled to the compensation.
Not as a business class passenger.
Not as a business class passenger. If GBNews, for example, sent you somewhere and they paid for it and booked it, because you're the passenger, you're entitled to the compensation, not GBNews. Because you paid more, you're still bound by the same compensation rules and what your entitlement will be. That can be anything from £200 to £500.
Fascinating. Last question, and again, all sorts of people are kind enough to watch and listen to our conversations here. Whether you be mum, dad and 5 kids going to the south of Spain for a holiday, or one person going to Europe to see a rock band, do you need to go to a lawyer? Do you go straight back to the airline? Do you go to the travel agent? What's your first port of call if you've been done over?
We would always say, make your complaint to the airline, go through their complaints procedure. In the terms, you might have an alternative dispute resolution service. That's port number 2. Number 3 would be the Civil Aviation Authority. And if all is lost, then solicitors.
Brilliant. We'll put that stuff up on a tweet and make sure that they all know. Paul, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Paul Britton, their legal expert from Britain and Time. I've enjoyed today. I shall be back again tomorrow until such time as they find Liam Halligan. But I wish him well if he's having a quick break. That's all we have time for today. Now, it's the news.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Heat will be the key feature of the weather this week. We're starting hot and sunny. Temperatures will drop a little through the middle of the week, but the potential for those temperatures to build once more through next weekend. High pressure has been building in for some time. This weather front, though, is going to change things up a little bit, certainly across northern areas over the next 24 hours. For today, though, most places seeing plenty of blue sky. The sunshine may turn a little hazy at times as some high cloud spills in, and that cloud will be thickening across western parts of Scotland during the day. But for most, as I said, it's all about plenty of sunshine and the temperatures. 25, 26 across eastern Scotland, 24 likely in the east of Northern Ireland, but for much of England and Wales, mid to high 20s. 33 is likely somewhere across parts of eastern England. It's going to be a very warm night, especially in eastern England, but we will start to see that weather front bringing cloud and rain to parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So things changing here, slowly turning a little cooler, but for most it's still a very, very warm night, a difficult night for sleeping. Parts of eastern England